Even though King Henry VIII legalized the Bible in 1539, it wasn't because he had a religious awakening. Henry had approached the Pope to ask for permission to divorce his wife and marry his mistress instead. When the Pope refused to give him that permission, Henry renounced Catholicism, divorced his wife anyway, and took the church out from under Rome's control. Instead, he made himself the head of the church in England. This new religion, neither Roman Catholic nor truly Protestant, became known as the Anglican Church or the Church of England. King Henry now essentially acted as its Pope. Knowing that allowing the translation of the scriptures into English would rile the Pope, Henry made it his first act to do just that. He funded the first legal English Bible just for spite. The monarchs of England have been the head of the Church of England ever since. The ebb and flow of freedom continued through the 1540s and into the 1550s. After King Henry VIII, King Edward VI took the throne, and after him came Queen Bloody Mary, who was a Catholic possessed in a quest to return England to the Roman Church. Under her reign in 1555, John Thomas Matthew Rogers was burned at the stake. Mary went on to do the same to hundreds of reformers for the crime of being a Protestant. Christians were forced to flee the country during this era known as the Marian exile. They left with little hope of ever being able to return to England again. Many of these refugees ended up at the sympathetic church at Geneva, Switzerland, which became a safe haven for desperate people at this time. Led by Miles Coverdale and John Fox, as well as Thomas Sampson, William Whittington, John Calvin and John Knox, the reformer of the Scottish Church, the Church of Geneva determined to produce a Bible that would educate their families while they continued in exile. The result of their efforts was a new complete Bible printed in 1560, which became known as the Geneva Bible. When Queen Mary's bloody reign ended, the reformers could return to England. The Anglican Church, now under Queen Elizabeth I, reluctantly tolerated the printing and distribution of the Geneva Bibles in England. The marginal notes, which were fiercely against the institutional Church of England, did not however rest well with the rulers of the day. By the 1580s, the Roman Catholic Church saw that it had lost the battle to suppress the Word of God. In 1582, the Church of Rome surrendered their fight for Latin only and decided that if the Bible was to be available in English, they would at least have an official Roman Catholic English version. And so, using the corrupt Latin Vulgate as their only source text, they went on to publish an English Bible with all the distortions and corruptions that Erasmus had revealed and warned of 75 years earlier. This is known as the Douay-Rheims version. In 1589, Dr. William Fulke of Cambridge published the Fulke's Refutation, in which he highlighted the distortion of the Roman Church's corrupt version. After Queen Elizabeth I, King James VI of Scotland became King James I of England. The Anglican clergy approached the new king in 1604 and announced their desire for a translation to end all translations. What resulted was the combined effort of over 50 scholars who took into consideration the Tyndale New Testament, the Coverdale Bible, the Matthews Bible, the Great Bible, the Geneva Bible, and even the Rheims New Testament. 7 years later, in 1611, these first King James Bibles came off the printing press, and one was chained to every pulpit in England. A year later, printing began on smaller versions, so that individuals could have a personal copy for themselves. The Anglican Church's King James Bible took decades to overcome the Geneva Bible as the most popular translation in England. It's something of an irony that many Protestant Christian churches today hold so tightly to the King James Bible as the only legitimate English language translation, even though it wasn't strictly a Protestant translation. It was printed to compete with the Geneva Bible by authorities who, throughout most of history, were hostile to Protestants and killed them. Even after England broke from Roman Catholicism in the 1500s, the Church of England continued to persecute Protestants throughout the 1600s. One famous example of this is John Bunyan, who wrote Pilgrim's Progress while in prison for the crime of preaching the gospel. It was persecution of Christians by the Church of England throughout the 1600s that led to many Englishmen fleeing across the Atlantic to start with new religious freedom in America. I highlight the fact that the Church of England is so close to the Catholic system, with the monarch of England replacing the Pope, because in our time we have seen, and I believe will continue to see, an increasing friendliness between the two and a rejoining of the two systems. In 2010, the Pope visited Britain for the first time in 28 years and was given the hospitality of the Church of England for the first time in history. We'll probably see more of that kind of thing in times to come. I also point it out for the sake of my fellow Scots, as this issue is a part of our spiritual heritage. Although England never had a true Reformation and only left Catholicism because of Henry VIII's divorce, Scotland, led by John Knox, did have a true Reformation and were filled with an incredible zeal for God. The Scots believed that there should be no figurehead or human king to rule over the church because their only king was Jesus and he alone was the head of the church. Therefore, when King James VI's son, Charles I, came to Scotland in an attempt to impose his headship and the Anglican system on Scots, they rejected it and instead created a document called the National Covenant. This covenant was between the Scottish people and God, and declared that they would be wholly devoted to him alone. In response to this, Charles tried to invade Scotland twice to impose Anglicanism by force, but was soundly beaten each time. The Scots were determined to retain their religious freedom. The Covenanters often had to meet in secret to avoid persecution during this time, and hundreds were killed, mostly by hanging, although many were shot during raids on prayer meetings. The last of the Covenanter martyrs was James Renwick, who was hanged on the 17th of February 1688 in Grassmarket Square, Edinburgh. His head and hands were then severed and placed over the gates of the city. The Men of Covenant by Reverend Alexander Smellie describes him like this. It was the 17th of February 1688 when James Renwick was martyred. Before the year was out, the Stuarts were in exile and persecutions was closed. He died as the herald of a more gracious day. He was of old Knox's principles, his adversaries said when they noted his unassailable steadfastness. But we may take our farewell of him in words which were written by one who loved him dearly. When I speak of him as a man, none more comely in features, none more prudent, none more heroic in spirit, yet none more meek, more humane than condescending, he learned the truth and counted the cost, and so sealed it with his blood.